when you live in nature, that the hearing is I think it's more dominant possibly, because in the jungle you cannot see far, but you can hear far. I think it was a matter of survival. I just listen to the spaces we live in. Through a recording of a forest within a 10-year interval, and then you listen to the recordings and you realize that there are actually 15 species missing. The soundscapes changed. And if the environmental impact is there, it changes. And through sound you can hear it. So that through listening we can have a better discernment maybe what's going on.
For episode 51, my guest is Aurelio, who is a musician, educator and sound healer. Through his extensive travels and studies all around the world, Aurelio has become a noted pioneer in the development and manufacture of innovative musical instruments. He is the creative director of the wonderful centre Svaram in Auroville, India. This conversation takes us into the world of sound and reveals why it is so important to the human experience on every level, from healing to community to even mating. We did this conversation in 2 parts. The first a year ago when I was in Auroville for the 50th birthday celebration and interviewed other Aurovillians, Marti and Aviram, which are episodes I recommend listening to. It was another late night interview and wasn't quite long enough, so we just did the second part of it now when I was visiting Auroville with my group on the Heart of Transformation pilgrimage. We share some soundscapes from Svaram during this interview, which I hope that you enjoy. If you would like to join my Presence mentoring program for some focus on clearing your patterning and integrating supportive practices into your life, you can still join this week or at the start of May. You can find out more about this over at www.amisha.co.uk/leadership. And I have 2 more retreats coming up in this half of the year. Into the Heart of Yoga, our volunteering yoga retreat with Ramina's Garden Children's Home in Rishikesh this March, and then Wild Grace, a heron's journey in Spain this May. You can find out more about these at www.amisha.co.uk. And we're looking into our summer gathering for July, and we'll have more information about that. So best to get on our newsletter list over at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co if you want to be invited to that weekend and meet other parts of our community, our listeners, guests, and general supporters. Thank you so much for being part of this beautiful future. As always, we love hearing from you, how these interviews are moving you, so do get in touch. I hope that you enjoy the conversation. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. delighted to be sat in Auroville with Aurelio. Welcome to the program and for bringing me here. We're sitting in your community, and we're listening in the background to the bells from the Kali temple.
There's a little shrine in the forest, and those shrines actually originally they were our seed banks, because around the shrines, they wouldn't cut the wood and clear cut it completely because it was sacred. And so all those shrines in the countryside were actually the banks where the seeds of the original vegetation was preserved. So when the first settlers came here, it was mostly barren land, savanna kind of, agrarian cashew fields and stuff like this also. And around the shrines, you had this original vegetation, as small as it was, but the first people they found, even the diversity was very beautiful, maybe 60 different plants, seeds, shrubs, a few trees. And from then, basically, it was an important, you can say, biological preservation bank. And from there, basically, seeds were propagated and then planted. Few million seedlings and changed the barren land into a garden.
Wow, it's so beautiful.
50 years, I don't know, 3 million trees, or what they say, some numbers. What I like around the equator, I don't know if it's the humidity, but there's always a very rich soundscape. You hear the insects.
Yeah.
You hear this. Might even hear. There's some crackers from a village festival.
Yeah. Yeah. India always feels so alive.
Exactly, rich. I had an assistant of mine who grew up locally and joined Auroville now at 3 years ago at the World Congress of Music Therapy in Austria. And his comment was, in Austria, in the small villages, in the countryside, the shops close at 5 o'clock and then there's nobody on the road. And he always said, where are the people? What happened? What happened? This was the first time really he came out of rural South India, where there are all the time people everywhere, all around. So it was so unusual for him in Europe. He said, where are all the people? Why are they all in their houses? What happened? That means actually, especially in southern countries, more life is happening outdoors. The community meets outdoors, basically.
I really enjoyed visiting your project, Svaram, that also has turned 15 this week. It was so beautiful to encounter the way that these instruments in the project are alive, like in the park that you've created, that there's a space for creative play with sound. The whole me visiting that project really made me feel very, very inspired. Yeah.
What inspired? Was it you felt something, you saw something, or you... Because many people have that experience, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
It's some life again, what you said.
It was on multi-levels. I feel like so many of the different instruments that I encountered or experienced, I felt them in different parts of my body. It really, it woke up different. There were so many different vibrations happening in my body. And also this feeling that I could play with music, and that music wasn't something that I had to, practice, perfect. It was like, there's a park here where I can just play with sound.
Yes.
And
very good.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of it.
Great.
I think one of our key sentences and motto was like, Svaram brings the joy of music and the touch of sound into everyone's hearts and hands.
Beautiful. What does Svaram mean?
Sound.
It means sound.
Of sound, with sound. I think Svara in Sanskrit is sound. Svaram is, I think it's a case form, accusative. With sound, through sound.
as we walked around the center and also the park, experiencing these different sounds and playing with these different sounds, the conversation was so interesting that we were talking about, well, so many things, but what really grabbed me was the explorations that you've done about how music is used in different cultures, or how it has been used traditionally in many different tribal cultures across the world.
I think that was a gift in my experience, because I wanted to study music ethnology in Vienna. I grew up in Austria on the Hungarian border, but then I thought, no, I cannot just study it from books. It was a bit, I said, no, I need to feel it. I want to understand what's the origin of music, how people, and then when I stayed around in the South Pacific for about 2 years, from California all the way to, through the islands, and then Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea. It was about 2 years in that area. And in that way it was nice. I was like experiencing it, learning it. And in most of those indigenous cultures, music was just such an, integral part, or maybe also because when you live in nature, your hearing sense has to be open. Mm-hmm. In the forests, I don't know, you're closer to nature, animal nature in that way. So I think it was a matter of survival, that the hearing is I think it's more dominant possibly, because in the jungle you cannot see far, but you can hear far. Through hearing you understand what's going on in the jungle. So I think the sense of hearing, and often I also traveled alone, I was in the highlands and on coasts, and I think there was also lots of listening time there. Coming after long hikes and walks through the jungle, and then coming out to a beach and hearing the soothing waves and stuff like this. I think time in, nowadays one would say meditation, but it was just like, kind of like exploring actually the beauty of the planet. Because that was in the 80s, so still hitchhiking rides on boats and waiting for freighters and copra boats and trading boats and all of that. So one still could kind of like a little bit wander like this, so isolated. And Pacific was interesting for me because it was the furthest away from European civilization. I just looked on the globe. I was 19 when I left, and said, where is the most isolated place on the planet? Because maybe there was this search for, I think maybe lost paradise a bit. This romanticism of origin of life and the purity of nature and all of that stuff.
And from all of the studying that you've done, are there some themes that you see that are very similar in how different cultures use music and what music brings to a community?
So that's one role of music, is the community, bringing the community together. Let's say but even, in the indigenous places and cultures, music is also used in, that's like jungle sounds, but it's our international dance therapy group, just arriving.
The sounds of the humans.
Exactly, human animals.
Yeah.
Of the human jungle, like urban sounds. No, the thing is, in those original cultures, music is just a part of life through making, building community. But music also has this function for every ritual, ceremony. Sound is announcing it, is accompanying it, it's closing it and stuff. So it's signifying. Sound is also a signifier of special moments, cycles. In some villages that the morning is announced or something, morning bells or wooden blocks, or in monasteries. 3 o'clock, I stay quite a bit in the Far East, and also 3 o'clock morning wood blocks, waking everybody up for the first 100 a day prostrations. So music and building community in the village and in the tribe. Music as a signifier. And then music also is the mystery. Because in the celebrations then, let's say in the tribal cultures, music is the instrument, the gateway, the portal into an altered state of consciousness. And when that's what celebration is, you want to get out of the ordinary and you want to plug in. So either a few people can do that, you know, some mediums, oracles, who really go into it, or the shaman. But the beautiful thing also, there's a mixture between this building community and collective trance. It's amazing. You know, through drumming and stuff like this. So music has the role as a portal, transporter, chariot to open the gates into other spaces. The mystic. The music, the bridge between this material life and then the subtle. And music is still, you can experience it sensory, but it also, it leads you beyond the senses, into imaginations, or into forgetfulness, into other dimensions, possibly. And then, of course, part of this is then also music as medicine. So when let's say in Papua New Guinea, you're across the country, through jungle paths and stuff, and then you come to places, might take like 14 days walking till you come to a next health station or something. So what you do when somebody falls from the tree and breaks his... it was just the right moment. Huh? So an accident while cutting the jungle, preparing it, agrarian or building houses or whatever, or slipping in the mud and you sprain your ankle or whatever, yeah? Or malaria, heavy malaria. So, you know, when sickness is there and the tribe has to move on and stuff like this, so what you do without medicine? So you have herbal medicine, yeah? And how if this person is like in pain, rolling in pain because the leg was cut or is infected and all of that? How would you do with it? So then, like a mother would do to a kid, you know, when a child falls, the mother is like, you know, I will be good, will be good, will be, ba, 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 or like this, or or rattles. And then the medicine man is coming in, forget this, everything is okay, everything is okay, don't worry, we'll take care of it. And then you know, the pain, you forget, you come into a dreamy space, when you're in a fever trance or something like this, and you fall asleep with it, and then you're a few hours without pain.
And there's loads of beautiful childbirth songs in different places as well.
I mean, that's the amazing thing also in those cultures, that in all life activities you have song. In labor, starting with labor. Often in Native Americans there's this beautiful legends, you know what, actually, that before actually conscious conception, before the lovers get together, they actually listen, go out somewhere in a special place and receive a song. And then they
share a
sing,
song to each other?
They share a song, they receive it, they get into a song and listen for the soul they are calling, and then the song is there, and with that song or the rhythm or pulsations they get together and they create this song. They create life out of a song, which they heard from the stars.
Wow. Okay, this is making dating in London a lot harder. This, and also you shared with me the Native American tradition of the men, that they used to learn to play the flute before they got married, to show that they're sensitive.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm collecting rituals that are gonna find a modern sensitive man.
Equivalent for London. If you date somebody, you meet somebody in the subway, or you check it out.
Yeah, be like, we need to go to Hampstead Heath. Can you play me the flute? And then we're going to wait for a song to appear.
Okay, you know, that was the thing actually when after a few years, I remember when I came back to Singapore, with a boat again and stuff, you know, and then zack, you're in this modern 20th century world again, skyscrapers and shopping centers. And it's like, it felt like, in this African, what these hilarious movies in the 70s, when the explorers, it looks like God fell from heaven for the black people when they encountered the first white ghosts. Yeah, so I had this return thing, and then it was interesting from this very experience of nature and the fluidity of nature and this indigenous culture and also the harshness. I'm not romanticizing it, It's, yeah. He wants to show his presence. Water also. Okay. And then you enter an urban space and there are different things happening. And for me, it was almost like I could hear the mind space. I could sense it. Because mostly in indigenous context, much less people. You have a village maybe of 80 people, and then it would take a few hours to the next one. And so then imagine entering with that openness and sensitivity from the jungle, you enter the city. Like a million people run around on their way and stuff like this. Like, wow.
Well, you feel the vibrations.
Yes.
And in a way, it is created by all of that sound and all of that movement from so many bodies, so much activity.
And luckily, and all the subtle, the radio waves, microwaves, the cell towers. Imagine if we would hear that stuff nowadays on top of it. Yeah. So it's a different environment. It took me years that I could kind of like shift that preference, part of the practice is in sound also you're in choiceless awareness. You're listening to whatever happens in the moment. And listening is actually, it's also like a song line from moment to moment. Because it always changes, it morphs. There's always a new impetus. And then slowly that witness is developing, just seeing it streaming. And then it doesn't matter eventually if it's this beautiful little rivulet or these waves on the seashore, or you are hearing this drone of that highway and the noise. And so then luckily we had people like John Cage, who was running around in New York, coming home from his studio, trying to record and all of that. And he passed by this drainage water thing and heard this beautiful river below the city, running water. And he said, huh? Oh, that sounds beautiful. I didn't get that in the studio. I didn't find it in the studio. And then suddenly, in Manhattan, maybe the ship horns, sustained ship horns, and down the Hudson and all of that. So suddenly the city also became a soundscape as any different environment. And anyway, when you're traveling, you realize that every place has not only different soundscape, but we call it different vibration, different feeling to it. So then this whole beautiful field of ecomusicology emerged in the 80s from Canada, Murray Schafer. Just listen to the spaces we live in. Coming so far, some of the latest research, fantastic, that actually through a recording of a forest, Bernie Krause work, through a recording of a forest within a 10-year interval, you get a much better, when you see a photo 10 years ago in the forest again, okay, maybe it's a bit thinner, the vegetation, it changed a little bit. Okay, it's the same forest. And then you listen to the recordings and you realize that there are actually 15 species missing. The soundscapes changed. And if the environmental impact is there, it changes. And through sound, you can hear it. So that through listening, we can have a better discernment, maybe what's going on. I'm not sure if we would have this listening memory, over 10 years, but you make a recording and then you listen to one after 10 years. You will definitely know that progress in the other direction, how maybe your little village or where you grew up, a township, how it sounded and how it sounds now. How it increased in the urban field, sound.
Yeah,
How
it's
that
really
morphed
interesting.
over the last 20 years.
Yeah, it feels like we don't really use sound so much in that way. We look at pictures of things.
Yeah. No, we are a visually orientated culture. We said even since maybe the last 2000 years, we focused on the visual development, which possibly even helped really to, in one way, differentiate the brain hemispheres and clarity and rationality. You can say that actually the rational development, maybe over the last 2000 years, great culture at that time, when the interpretations of the Shrutis started. Reflections, reflective mind coming in, it was with discernment, with the eyes, eye development. And you can say also with eyes, more, my teacher said it was more like a masculine sense, clarity, waking sense. With hearing, you go into spaces. Hearing is the sense of akasham, of space. While seeing, you more dealing on a level of fire, clarity of light, waking, discerning. So with hearing, you're probing space, like sounding the bay when the ship comes in. Okay, that was still a measurement.
Yeah, I find that in my personal practice, mantra is such a key part of my daily sadhana.
Beautiful.
I love to chant, and I really feel it on my cellular body. I feel it wake everything up, and I feel like more and more people in Western culture, it is catching on more and more. There are more gong bars, sound
listening
healings,
is coming in for sure, sounding.
All of these experiences where this space to connect and heal through sound is opening up. And it makes me think of when I think about my experience of sound and music, it feels like it's been such a prominent part of my own life, but also I feel like the culture that I grew up in, the dominant kind of Western culture, didn't really pay it attention as being important.
Yeah, because it was a dominant Western patriarchal culture orientated into doing, into making, into checking it all out, learning, understanding, categorizing it. And so hearing is the receptive sense. It's the ear. The ear is like how you call it, a shell, a nautilus, a snail, a spiral. Yeah? So hearing is more, you can say that, and that I think the emergence of sound and sound work and the longing and interest in it, it goes together with the reawakening of the feminine. But not only the feminine, more like an integration. Now that we have the grid, we understand the grid, we know natural science, now it's again, but what is it making though? What's the consciousness field behind it? What's the quantum space behind all the particles? And what's the waves? We dissected life in one way. We look through it. We see the structure. We learned about the structure, but now it's more, again, the feminine is more sensing it. What's behind it? What's moving it? Out of what is it emerging? What's the purpose of it? You said very beautiful mantric practice. You're listening, and the beautiful in mantric practice is you become active again. That was your subject initially. You said perceiving the inner work, and how is the inner work expressing itself? So mantra is a beautiful bridge, because the listening and the speaking, it's like the yin and the yang. There's a little similar relationships there between seeing and thinking. So perceiving and thinking, creating. So with speaking, we are creating. With listening, we are receiving, sensing, perceiving, feeling, becoming one with that flow, receiving life into us. We listen with all our cells. As you said, the instruments in the station, each one touched a different place, a different layer of the being. And then this speaking basically is like a response. But with the speaking we can create reality. We co-create. And mantric practice it's a magic key in one way, because we learn speaking beauty. That which creates beauty, that which creates wholeness, which creates alignment, which creates, because mantra, they came from that source. Mm-hmm. They're an expression of that experience, basically.
And you've done some exploring of sound and trauma.
Mm-hmm. Basically, let's say, we say in sound and healing that every dis-ease has to do with a blockage of the flow, block of prana, of energy, of breath, of life forces. And trauma can be a very deep-seated block. Traumas are often early life experience also, or if somebody loses a beloved or a kid. So there's such a shock in the heart, there's such a pain and twisted thing. So, for instance, losing a dear one goes together when we have such a shock and such a cramp here, breast cancer. Because you cannot assimilate it, you cannot transform it, you cannot move it. The pain is there, it's stuck, and it rolls like a record in itself, it convolutes and all of that. And so that's kind of like at the core of disease and chronic problems. And with sound, the beautiful thing is also sound is like a massage with waves and vibrations. You go through the whole system. There's no limit. There's no body border. I can massage your tissue, your bones, your sinews, your limbs. But with sound, it just goes through all the viscera, through all the organs, through all the spaces, even through the skull. The skull actually is resonating very strong. Yeah.
And the brain doesn't have to be involved.
Yes, it's non-verbal. I had actually some studies in music therapy, which is mostly music and psychology. How does it affect you? What does it do in you? What images does it give you? Or it reminds you to this thing. So it's like psychotherapeutically processed. But the beauty of sound work, it's kind of like, I think it goes back to the elements of music and entrainment. So how does a pulse, if I'm sitting in a boom, dum, 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 da, dum, 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 da, dum, dum, da, da, dum. You sink into it, yeah. So, and it's a basic pulse or frequencies. I want to rise out of it, but not fully. That's the Trishruti of the mantras. We touched upon that. Mm-hmm. That is Manish. Yeah. The code. Yeah. It's like our middle place, there's something above us. We're in Antariksha, there's the earth below and heaven above. And with sound is the Jacob's ladder. And through sound work, I think they're interested in the young generation. Sound is also because we learn about layers, densities, frequencies, bandwidth. And because we don't want to live only in one bandwidth. We don't want to be stuck in one radio station. Mm-hmm. You want to have the possibility of going through all the bandwidth of the being, from its densest parts, from the bones and earth and gravity and all these challenges of material life, but we can reach into the highest subtleties. And they are just basically frequencies, different layers of frequencies.
And what's fascinating is that sound can transcend us into different frequencies.
Into in different dimensions, you can almost say. Like, as we said, different bandwidth, but sound is spherical. So it's not like, here's this chakra and there's a tone and here's the next tone. Sound is always spherical. Every sound is like a hologram. it works through all of it. All the frequencies work through all layers. Of course, maybe with a predominance or something. So it's a bit silly that you want to equate frequencies to certain layers of it. One could say, yeah, but it's more, nature is much more fascinating, more complex, more interrelated, more quantum.
And the mystery is inherent in sound.
Yeah, it's as
in
I
music.
said, yes, it's inherent, immanent, yeah, but also actually opening, strange enough, also the space into the transcendent.
And what's interesting is there are all of these dimensions that we can travel into through sound that are healing and where we can discover more about ourselves and open up in new ways. And then what's interesting is that there are sounds that are completely torturous to the human.
Did we touch upon that? Huh? That what a shock, that sound is used as one of the main tortures because you don't see the damage of it, horrifying. I mean, you see it. In one, I was recently at the village festival here. It was so loud, the speakers, it was incredible. It was painful on the body. Yeah. As we said, we talked about urban context. I imagine people who work in machine environments, factory environments, constantly, like every day, 8 hours.
The same soundscape.
Yeah. And then again, what a balm, then even if you have earphones and protection, or you come through music, it can be in a different space. Again, you can do somewhere and be somewhere which is quite kind of like odious, and with the help of sound, you can put yourself in a different state. You can say state of being, a state of perception. I think that's the real gift of music, that there's always a possibility of relinking to source.
And it can clear a space, create an environment.
Yeah.
And so one of the things
that was the function of bells.
Yeah.
That's what they do with bells.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I'm teaching or in my home, or if I'm, inviting other people into a space, and I will often use sound, whether it's my own voice through mantra, or whether it's, with a bell or something, and go around and change the space. Or if I feel uneasy in a space, then I'll just put mantras on, and immediately you feel something shift.
So you see, that's natural. That's the natural use of sound. As I said, we come back to the indigenous cultures or the simple, not the simple folk, even culture, as you said, in monasteries. Sound has so many functions, and in our society, like it was like everything else, stripped into this narrow bandwidth of capitalistic, materialistic consumerism. And it was used as an entertainment, as a product, as something to gobble up and enjoy and own and do business with, and like so many other things. Yeah? And I think that was the reawakening into listening. It's realizing, hey, there's a gift here. In the hierarchy of senses, hearing is opening into space. You have smell is like earth. You smell the earth and stuff like this. You taste the saps and the waters and the juices of life. Yeah, you see the shades of lights. Yeah, you touch movement. You are touched by movement. Yeah, but with listening, you come into perception of space. What is space? We are space, but something is happening in space. There's a beingness in space.
Yeah, there was one of the instruments that we were looking at, and you were sharing about how in the Indian way of reading music, the focus is on the space between the notes.
Yeah. In the process, on the wave. So we pinpoint music into notes, into dots. It's the same again. We look at the particles. Whereas in the Indian music, It's like the gamma cusp between two notes, how many different ways you have. You can slide, you can slop, you can jump, you can stumble, you can zoop, zoom between notes. So that's the process of life. That's the moving of it. So then we're in the wave.
Yeah. This is one of the reasons why I enjoy jazz, because there is such play.
Yeah.
When you watch a jazz band like playing together, and the way that they are reading each other and filling the space and riffing with each other.
Yeah. Playfully.
Teasingly. Yeah.
Teasingly, challengingly. Yeah. And then having the joy of bang, being together again. Yeah, that's the dance of music. And there you come back again into its amazing role. And I mean, think of it. Maybe not especially because religion is losing its grip. Maybe thankfully all these dogmatic, narrow limitations in life, you know, if we're moving into a spiritual opening, we are, we realizing maybe that we're more a human family beyond what we believe. And music, see the role of music. Even if it's Justin Bieber or, you know, teenager music or whatever, or cinema music or classical music. What an amazing community building force of coherence. Of bringing us together beyond belief systems.
It's so true.
Beyond dogmas and stuff like this.
Yeah, like the dance movement of God is a DJ, and the way that people will come together on a dance floor through club culture, and they'll form a family. Or if you like the same band, you form a community, a tribe around that. And then it doesn't matter how old you are or where you're from or what you do for work or any of these things. If you
all the classes,
if you enjoy the same music, then
brotherhood, fraternity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it
or
is.
Sisterhood. Or both together.
Yeah. And there's no human peoples, I think, where who don't have music as part of their life.
Yeah, that was my next question actually, is do all humans need to be making music on some level?
I would not even say making music, because music has to do, again, let's say in that sense it's receiving. It's more like, let's say, living in a listening space. Yeah? South Sea music, you know, ukulele, and it's all very sweet, and it just floats and bubbles along because, of the ocean, of the waves on the islands. And this ocean is most of it. You know, there's few dots in the Pacific Ocean. And so I think in nature you live in music. You're surrounded by music. It changes over the day, and there's all these natural cycles. And of course, we, even as a protection, we're shutting off in loud urban environment and all of that, you know, protecting us, yes. And I think in that way, music has this role of nourishing. So it's not about making music, listening. It's also listening music, receiving music, enjoying music, celebrating with music, or using music to go into deeper spaces, using music to quieten down. There was a beautiful challenge once. We were working on a garden, let's say of temple garden. How can we bring sound into the garden so it enhances the stillness and silence of it? And it's just that you have drops of awareness. Ding, ding. In Zen gardens they had that. You know, there was this bamboo, it was filling in and then tok, tok. And the water was splashing over. And when we were sitting meditation, it was like a fresh impetus again. Every, I don't know, 7 minutes or something. You know, our project was actually, maybe we can close with that one, when the Millennium Goals were put together at the turn of the millennium. We need shelter, we need water, we have all the same right for food and for all of that. They realized after a few years running, but you know, this is all still basic basic nature stuff, even equality, gender equality, and all of that. That's really primal stuff. What makes us human? What differentiates us? What's our prime purpose? So culture, human culture. What expresses human culture? What's the most common expression of human culture? It's music. So then they added basically, so our project was adopted as one of the first 50 on the planet, was the music as a natural resource. Basically, they asked a friend in New York University, can you put something together? Can we show that music is like a natural resource? It's necessary for survival also. It has to be part of those goals of moving into a new millennium. Wow. I have a young student. We met her, Milena, today. She studied in Paris human rights, and she's so inspired. She thinks, hey, can I bring human rights and music together?
Yeah.
Shouldn't be basic human rights that we have a right for music, for being in listening.
I'm interested to follow her work.
Beautiful, huh? So that again, finally, yes, it's what food is, what we say, food for our sustenance, for our body. Music is sustaining our soul, nourishing it, celebrating it.
Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative. Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs. Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty. Aurelio, it's so wonderful to be back with you a year later. And now we're sitting in Svaram, in your center, in the studio. We can hear a little bit in the background, people experimenting with the instruments. It's really wonderful to come back and ask a few more questions. And what I'm interested in is really getting a sense of what is it that music is doing? Like, we kind of talked about the power of it as this bringing people together, this tool for bringing community and for healing. But what actually is music?
I think music expresses the inherent underlying structure, order, matrix of the universe. Because within music, let's say that was the work of Pythagoras, mythologically, kind of like, and historically, on that edge of just being in the magic of music and then trying to understand music. Yeah? And in Greek culture, we had the quadrivium, the four sacred science. It was mathematics, language, etymology, grammar, and all of that. It was geometry, and it was harmonics. Yeah. And harmonics, basically, the way how we can approach harmonics is through music. Music, we have a sensory experience. We don't need to think. We feel it. We can lose ourselves into it. But I think at that time, and even now with the newest development in science, it's important to look what is it in music that calls us into it, that harmonizes us, that reconnects us, that realigns us. And basically, we say music, I mean, in different traditions it was expressed differently. I think in those times, in the Greek times, there was this edge. Maybe also the need to understand music. We talked in the Greek mythology, we talked about the Dionysian side and the Apollonic side. And Dionysian was all the trance, natural, shamanistic space, experience music, being in the magic of it. And the Apollonic approach was try to understand how is the universe working, how is music working. So bringing the feeling approach with music together to an intellectual, dissecting, deconstructing approach. And basically, it goes back methodologically to Pythagoras, and we actually think and say that he got his knowledge of having been in Egypt for 20 years and was initiated in that culture, that he basically, through listening, working with the monochord, with the one string instruments, and if you do that, and I could show it very easily to you, he realized that in that one sound, there are many different sounds. Where are they? How are they coming about? And if you see on the string, I'm going with my finger on a flageolet position through the strings, suddenly I realize, wow, there's a very strong sound, and it's exactly on the half of the string. I look for other prominent underlying overtones, we call them, and then I realize on the third of the string, there's another strong one. On the fourth of the string, on the fifth of the string. So there's a very clear structure, what we call then in the harmonic series. We have in one tone, there's this fullness of a whole, excerpt of frequencies in the overtones. And basically, you can bring then together the laws of music with the laws of arithmetics, geometry, mathematics. And this beautiful thing, and I think that's going on over the last 2,000 years. In many different other fields also. How can we, the more we understand the mystery of the creation and some of its magic, the more we understand it, the more we can master it. And I think we are working here in Auroville on the premise of an integral consciousness, where we are happily diving into unknown spaces in body work, in meditation, in exploration, but also trying to understand how is it happening, what's happening in the body, what's going on neurologically, on an endocrinological level. How are all those functionings? And the beautiful thing in the science of harmonics, which is basically saying that this inherent structure and law of music, you can find it everywhere in creation. From the microcosmic structure of the atom and its electrons and how those ones move and are relating to each other, to the movement of the stars. So that saying, and that occupied humanity again and again over this last 2,000 years, that phenomenon of the music of the spheres. The universe sings, Nada Brahman, the world is sound. Everything is sound. We are created through sound. Out of sound, the creation is happening. That in most of the creation myths, and Marius Schneider, he was this German professor in the 50s, 60s, he examined all the creation myths, or many of them, of humanity, of all the indigenous cultures. And in most of them, what is reflected in the Bible is there was a speaking, there was a sound event which actually brought forth manifestation. Let's say at the beginning, there's this unknown cosmic ocean, and emptiness possibly, and then something is igniting. Something is starting to throb. It's a different question what initiates that movement. In Kashmir Shaivism we would say Icha, a will to be and to become and to explore and to understand and to discover and to become conscious. Pure being doesn't need a movement. It is in itself. It's all or it's nothing. But in that process of pure being also wanted to become, what is this? And in this, the becoming, how being unfolds, is reflected in the basic structure of music. So in Sanskrit we speak also about this first movement as a throb, as a spanda. It's a throb, and with the throb, with that first movement, basically Shiva in his emptiness and quietness, he starts to move, and the movement is the Shakti. The Shakti is the energy, the manifesting energy, consciousness, force. And through that movement, basically, how they say there's an expansion and a contraction. A throb is happening, pulse is happening. Now, the same processes are reflected ontologically when our being is coming into manifestation. We had this beautiful time, many years ago, there was a world-famous researcher on intrauterine perception. What's the first perception this growing embryo is having actually? And the first thing is whoop, 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 whoop. Even if it's just a cellular structure, it's contracted, expanding. Yeah. So that means we are geared, if we hear it or not, but the organism, even if it's a very simple cellular structure, perceives this movement of whoop, 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 whoop. And that's actually expansion and contraction. And the heart muscles go whoop, 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 whoop. They contract and release. So from there we get the pulse. And all of us are, who are coming through this incarnation process, that's what we are in a space, in a fluid space, where actually sound travels in fluid space, 7 times as fast. It's a complete sonic medium. And in that medium, we're exposed to pulsation for 9 months. Yeah. And then the sense of hearing, I say after the sense of touch is the first one to develop, but fully developed possibly 5th, 6th months. Yeah. So we are all geared up through pulse. We all have pulse in ourselves constantly. I don't know if you saw images. I've been with a 96-year-old person recently for a heart scan, and you see this heart, and then you think, oh my God, this thing is moving since 100 years without stop. So we are bathed in this pulsation. Yeah. And then very interesting, you could look then like 80% of the pulsation, of the structure of pulsation is still without the structure. There's no, only structure comes in when I emphasize something like this. Now in Aborigines, in original music, they are based on pulse. There's no rhythm yet. It's just pulsations. So that's one musical, basic primal principle, the pulsation. And what's the next thing coming in the sense of hearing is coming in Vienna, there was this beautiful house of music, and one chamber, it was about the size of this one, kind of like simulated the sound of the intrauterine space. And it's quite extraordinary. When you hear that, it's like actually, for me, the perception was, it was like intergalactic sound. Because you have all of it, you have the intrauterine sound, you have the digestive sounds, the heart sounds, or whatever is happening in the body of the fluids, muscles, and that amazing, unique expression of the human being, the voice, speech. What is speech? Yeah, every animal can express their instincts and likings and dislikings and pain and fear and all of that. But speech is something completely different. We can bring concepts, ideas, thoughts into speech, into manifestation. And how does the growing embryo perceive speech? It perceives the different frequencies and the harmonics of speech. Because behind speech, and we again find that in primal speech, Polynesian, matrilineal languages, they have hardly any consonants. Yeah, so I'm just saying it is like awa ya wataya, oseya wa mamai uyawa. It's all vowels. Huh? And what makes vowels? Vowels, each vowel has a different format, a selection of the harmonic series, very clearly structured excerpts of the harmonic series of sound. An A and an E discern itself only through the basically selected structure of the harmonic series. So that means that baby listens to the primal functioning of discerning frequencies and learning, let's say, the basic matrix of frequencies naturally. And when the baby, how to say, for instance, the mother is in a dire situation, and the mother would be in, in some emergency or some difficult circumstances, of course that organism feels it. There are different hormones working in the body, and the baby relates it to the sound environment also. So we basically get through the mother's voice, we get the understanding of frequency, and which frequencies, usually the closer intervals of the harmonic series are harmonious, and beyond the seventh overtone or something, they're unusual because they're not so predominant. So what we get from the mother is harmonious. What is foreign to it is dissonant. It doesn't fit into our nest, so to say. So we are born with a natural kind of like selection of what's harmonious and what's not harmonious.
Does that mean then when you're in the womb, if there are a lot of beautiful sounds and music and calm voices, that completely changes your relationship with harmonics than if you were in the womb when there was a lot of shouting and violence and stress?
Yeah, interesting. Well, maybe when you're in such a difficult environment, like when, you know what, mothers in the urban centers or in China in factories and stuff like this, maybe it gives those growing beings actually to be, to be prepared for the difficult situation on the planet in one way. And you know, in the traditional societies, women who are practiced, even here in Tamil Nadu, very strong, you are kind of like in the state of a princess. You are protected not only from your food, but especially also in which environment. It shouldn't be shouted. There shouldn't be quarrels around the becoming mother and stuff like this. I mean, both ways, you know, in traditional music families, actually, in India, that's still happening 7 to 8 months. You know, in a music family, a musician is invited and plays for the mother and the baby. And then basically you can say that music education, then they really actually start training. That it's 2 hours a day. I've been in a family, but 2 hours the musician sings or plays the drums or plays an instrument. They do it consciously for this growing being. Yeah. Oh. And of course that makes a big difference in which environments, what we listen. And so that means it's interesting, you know, I think even in psychoanalytic processes, we usually think it's all, we talked about it, you know, many of the traumas, they go back actually to early childhood experiences. But I personally went through an experience where it actually, I couldn't place it, and then through some bioenergetic work, realized it was an experience in pregnancy I had. And I went through a session, and a day later I worked with, a very famous astrologer, and I had asthma as a kid. And then they looked, well, actually in the 8 months of pregnancy, there was this impact of violence. And I had actually experienced it the day before, and then he told me from the astrological chart if there was any violent impact. I said, not that I know. I mean, we don't remember. But I went home and checked, and there was something.
Wow.
There's a story. So that means even we can, we are definitely influenced, through experience, especially in late pregnancy also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like late pregnancy up until age of 7,
yes,
we're so
exactly.
formed
We're very
by everything we
vulnerable.
take in. We're so open.
Yeah.
I love your sharing about the harmonics and bringing it to Kashmir Shaivism and the Spanda. It's so beautiful to experience it that way. I feel like when I have had sound kind of healing or sound experiences myself, or when I've been in a room and I've watched other people go through them, there is something quite like baby-like about how it impacts us. Like often people just sort of come into this almost like this uterus kind of space where they, you know, they kind of lose a lot of the other senses and they're really lost in it. And often people can't really speak afterwards, you know, they're kind of in this space. And I think that can often also happen when you watch really beautiful musical performances, like that all kind of transports you somewhere. Can you share what's happening to us then?
Yeah, my perception is actually of also working for many years in those contexts and doing it for people weekly, actually in weekly sessions on sound path, is that I think we are coming into the vibratory side of our existence. You know, even if you just take, we mentioned just kind of like symbolically, I spoke about quantums, but let's say if there are particles of matter, you know, or maybe they're just nodes, intensifications on nodal points of waves, and in between there is, what is in between? What's that field in between? Yeah, that field is basically, it's a field, I'm saying it, I have this image, a field of waves, of field of movement, of, I don't know, pulsations or something like this. And we can measure actually that thing. When we had tests here, we used it in our studios also, in sound treatments, in sound baths, what's happening. The brain switches into a lower frequency. It goes from a beta wave in which we want to understand and collect information, and our senses are very alert. We come, as you said, in this baby's state, and isn't that beautiful? If you look at sleeping humans, we are all in that baby state. Unless we become very old humans and we start snoring, then something different, then a different sound spectrum is coming in. But there is, I think, in this vibratory state of being, we become, there's also not, even if we have the personal experience and subjective experiences, but the personalities, the mask, the persona, we can put the persona aside. Yeah, the persona, it means something is sounding through. That's the mask of the persona in the Greek word. We can put that aside, and we're in that which sounds, in that which vibrates, in that which flows. And that means in brainwave research, we go into an alpha or even deeper theta state. And we get into that fluidity. I mean, even in yoga work, we have that thing, you are, you're going through your asana, you go through your process, you're very alert, but what leads you through is the flow of the breath, you know, through in asana sessions. But then finally, if you come, the integration is happening in savasana, in the relaxation, where, if it's a good practitioner, you come into that nidra state. Yeah? I talk, so nidra yoga is actually being in that state between waking and sleeping. You're in this fluid, dreamy space. Yeah? So I speak about nada nidra. It's with the help of sound coming into that fluid space.
Beautiful.
Now, one thing maybe maybe for closing, I see it's okay. I think it's fluid there also. We just started last week with this vocal improvisation group, and there's some beautiful people in it, a small group. What I wanted to share, which might be interesting for for listeners, and is Svaram was started as this social development project, and to give work to unemployed, youth at risk, and all of that. But it's such a beautiful learning field where everybody who is involved is in this learning process. And now we have more and more student interns, even PhD students from different parts of the world, volunteers. And we are so inspired by what's happening and unfolding that we are actually already since 1 year in the planning of a campus. We're planning this a Svaram campus for the crafts, arts, and science of sound.
Amazing.
For making the instruments, and instrument building means actually exploring matter and materials to their vibrational capacity of resonance. That's the craft of it. The science is the understanding how does sound work, not only purely in its acoustic properties, but also in a subtle spiritual science. What is it doing to the energy body? What is it doing in healing? How is all of that working? And then the third thing is the arts, the application of that. The application of the crafts and the knowledge in artistic ways. And of course, mostly focused on healing arts. And I think that's in one way, it's like a renaissance of reconnecting to the original purpose of music. Because we mentioned that music became a commodity in our society, and
along with everything else.
Yeah, exactly, and the product. But music was always there, how to say, building community. We mentioned it, building community, ritual, coming into the now, celebrating significant moments in a life or in a yearly cycle, and music for healing. So music had this function of connecting our material, logical reality with that which is beyond and within and in between. And I see it so beautifully with young people coming from different parts of the world. They all come with that question for that mystery. And creating that campus, basically, we're doing it so that there's more space that we can explore the, let's say, the magic, the mystery, and the science of sound.
I imagine a lot of our listeners are going to want to come and be part of that, and also some really beautiful pieces of work are going to come from that.
Yeah, because I think the idea is to create a node, and hopefully there will be many others on the world also, where co-creation can happen. You see, that's so beautiful, because I have a sculptor here, I have a sound engineer here, and let's say a product designer, and maybe somebody who is deeply into yogic studies, and you bring them together, all with that aspiration on exploring the phenomenon of sound and music. And the beautiful thing is we're working with the unknown. It's not like, let's go and do this thing now. It's like, hey, what's happening in you, and what moves you, and what inspires you, and what are your needs? And out of this thing, and the basic premise of all of that work is that we understand ourselves as working actually in service for the good of humanity and the sustaining beauty and wonder of our life on this planet.
Thank you for doing this, because it feels like so much of what we're creating right now as humans has these limits around it. It's, we're going to make this with this budget for this purpose. We're going to study this, but the funding means it's about this. And because we're doing that, we're commodifying all knowledge and learning and creativity. that it means that we don't have time for the unknown. And that's where everything that we actually need to bring in for these times that we live in, for everything that's happening with humanity and with the climate and all of this integration, it involves us opening up to what is just below the surface so that we can bring it into life and learn from it.
Yeah, because how can we create the new when we work from the known? So, I mean, of course, that's the basic premise of research in one. We are explorers. We're explorers, we are discoverers, and maybe, how to say, what we still need and to integrate in the West, we are pilgrims. We are on a journey discovering the mystery of, and we realize the deeper and deeper we go, the bigger the wonderment is. Yeah, and the last thing, as I said, and we are here serving the whole of it. As much as we change inside, that can affect the surroundings and the environment, we are not doing it for ourselves. And that for me was a very beautiful learning in my early 20s with indigenous people. Whenever something was achieved, yeah, whenever something was accomplished, the building of the house or even a successful fishing trip or something like this, there was always this moment of gratitude and sharing it with all living beings. Even if you're coming back from the hunt, but the gratitude that the planet, the Mother Gaia, is supporting it and providing it. And when we are so privileged actually to receive it, let's have this consecration of connecting and being with the whole of it. And I think that's where our big learning in Western society is, and how can we really come into that integration that can only come through an integral consciousness. Where the physical, the vital life energy field, the thinking intelligence, the primal layers of magic and archaic and mysticism, and maybe the higher unknown, unspeakable layers, where all of it we realize that's us. And music, the prime function of music is bringing us into the awareness of it, because through music we can have experience through the whole strata of it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Aurelio. We're going to end with some soundscapes so you can experience the beautiful work that comes out of the center. And how do we find out more about the center? What's the website?
Very easy. Svaram is sound, so it's just Svaram and organization, svaram.org. That's it, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Aurelio, for sharing. It's been really beautiful to spend this evening with you. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?